The next thing we're going to do is we're going to trim the base. Okay, as we notice, it's nice and smooth, and it's nice and rounded. So when we get to mounting it, we'll be able to smooth the mounting stone right along the model. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pin the models. We're going to put 4 pins as far apart as we can without hitting the dowel pins. To make sure that we drill all the way down. So we have 4 holes. Now we're going to do the mandibular. Remember, the mandibular, we should not be pinning in here because this is a thin area. So we should go right along the ridge. Perfect. Now we'll bring our little well, and we're going to put some short pins into the bases. If we put too much glue, we should wipe it off right away, so it doesn't so it allows us to keep the sleeves all the way down to the model. This is the lower, so we're going to put the sleeves with the white side down. And just like this. Now we're going to glue the maxillary. And if it doesn't fit down, we can use the handle of a wooden knife, plaster knife, to kind of hammer it down in there so that the little wide area of the pen sits down right into that offset in the hole. Off. And here we go. Now on the upper, we'll flip it upside down with the wide side up. And this will allow the model to stay up and not to drift down when we're working on it on the articulator. So here we go. Now we'll make sure that these models fit together properly. Which they do. Next we'll have to fix them together so we can articulate. So we're going to put the models together and make sure that the teeth interdigitate properly. There should be no rock when we put it together. On the areas where we have the abutments, if you squeeze that together here, there's going to be a rock. So where we have to kind of make sure that there's no rock is when we squeeze them around the teeth, especially the posterior teeth. Like there's one here, that's going to be one stop, and the other two stops will be here and here. So if we squeeze it right around here and in the posterior here, it should be pretty solid. So once we figure out where to interdigitate the teeth, we're going to take the glue gun and we're going to glue them. So there's no need to put glue everywhere. So we're going to just glue it in the posterior sections and one in the anterior section. After we put some glue on it, we're going to hold it until the glue cools down and holds the models. As we can see, the glue is pretty stretchy, so when it cools down, it's going to turn into rubbery material. So if we touch it now, it's going to feel like honey. So we just wait until we can poke it with our nail and we don't leave an indent. At that point we can be sure that the glue is hardened, and we can proceed with the articulation. Starting to harden now, so we can very carefully place it down on a flat surface and let it set up completely. Okay, now that the glue has hardened, we can spray the model with some separator, but only the top, because that's the model we're working on. The bottom will not have to be removable, so we can leave that plain so it sticks to the articulator. Now we're going to leave it a little bit and let it dry a little, and then we're going to wash it off. This type of separator kind of soaks into the model, and even though even though you wash it off, it will keep the model separated. It will keep it from sticking to the plaster or mounting stone as we mount it on the articulator. Okay, now that it's washed off, we can dry up the model a little bit. And we also have to be careful. Try not to get the glue wet, because as soon as we wet the glue, it will release the stone, which is how we're going to separate it once we mounted it on the articulator. Another little tip is on top of the pins, before we mount it, I just put a dot of wax over each pin so that there's no stone that gets inside these holes. And once we separate this from the articulator, then we can clean the wax off and fit it back onto it. So before we mount it, we're going to mount the top first. So before we mount it, we're going to put a little bit of putty right on the articulator, and we're going to center the model on the articulator. You have to make sure that the occlusal plane is parallel to the floor, and the occlusal plane is also somewhere in the middle here, and that is more or less the Bonwell triangle. If we put a rubber band around the articulator, these little areas here signifies where your occlusal plane should be. So what we need to do is we kind of center it and try to get that occlusal plane as close as possible to the rubber band. If we can't, it's okay, because remember the Bonwell triangle is an average, so as long as we can get close to it, we should be able to build our case accordingly, so it's not too far off the average. So right now we can see that the mounting would be a lot lower than this rubber band. So we're going to have to raise up the articulation a little bit. So we'll open the articulator, remove the model, and maybe add a little bit of putty to this. So we'll add it right to the top. And this is also a secondary use for the pins on the bottom. We can just push the pins right into this putty, and it will hold our model very well. Don't forget, by the way, to set this pin to 0, or the red mark on top here, not on the bottom, on top. So at that point we can see that we cannot close the articulator all the way, and if we push this all the way down, then the occlusal plane will be a lot further down than the rubber band. So what we'll do is this. I'm going to take a clipper. This clipper I bought it in a pet store. Has a little concave blade for the nails so that they don't slip out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these sleeves off. And we're going to clip them off about halfway. Just about like that. And then we're going to put them back the same way, with the flat surface up. But this time it will give us a lot more space to move up the model so that the occlusal plane will be higher up. You see? Put this back. Make sure it's down. So now we can raise up this model. To be much closer to where we're supposed to get it according to the Bonwell triangle. Now we can double check the measurement from the condyle to the lower anteriors, and that's just about right. So now we're going to mix the stone. We can remove this rubber band. And we'll use about 100 grams of stone. Since this is pretty close together, we don't need to use too much. So we set this at 0 and add a few scoops till we reach 100 grams. So this is mounting stone. The advantage to this is it's very strong, and also it doesn't shrink or it doesn't expand. That's about 100 grams. So according to our notes here, mounting stone takes 26 milliliters of water to 100 grams. So I'm gonna use 20 and 6. Now for this I like to use a beaver tail spatula, since we can more easily mix and place the mounting stone onto the model. I feel this is a little too thick, so I'm gonna add maybe 1 more milliliter of water. Sometimes either the scratches or the fact that the bowl is dry may absorb some water, so our ratios might be off. So this is a very quick setting stone, so we need to work fast. First thing is we smear it onto the top portion of the articulator, and then put it on the model. As we can see, the cleaner our instrument, the easier the stone comes off. So now we may have to hold it a little bit until this stone sets. So we can start cleaning up the model, all the extra stone with the fingers. I like to use my thumb, since it creates a nice concave surface and it gives the final work a more polished look. Don't go too crazy with it, because right now we can't wash our hands, so the stone will just keep sticking to your hands. So we just want to take off just the major amounts of stone, and we can at a later point do a little bit more fixing on it. Just make sure everything's nice and even, and hold the model, if you have mounting stone that is and it sets this fast, hold it until it stops smearing. As the stone gets harder, we can clean them more and more with our fingers, because it will start becoming less and less sticky. Now it's gotten to the point where it's kind of holding itself, so at this point we can let it go, wash our hands, and just smooth it out real nice. After this sets up completely, we can use some sandpaper and really finish it up nicely. Now when we're pulling this apart, you want to try not to separate this model from the top yet. So when we take it apart, we have to be very careful. See, now this is already setting, it's getting warmer, so we can clean the bowl. Okay, now it's pretty much set, so we're going to flip over the articulator, hold the model, and very slowly lift up the bottom, and then we'll remove the putty. As we can see, since the base of our counter model is thin, we don't have a base port for this, so we're going to have to fill all this with mounting stone. So we're going to mix maybe 100 grams should be enough, maybe 125. So we're better off mixing a little more than not enough. We're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna measure it out. With mounting stone, especially if we're doing a big case such as this one, it should be measured. So that we don't have any expansion or contraction. And so mounting stone, 100 grams, 26 cc's of water. You might need 27, so we're going to get a little bit more water ready. And remember, with this one, we don't put separator, because this is the opposing model, and we're not going to remove this. So let's add a little bit more water. Temperature here is right now is pretty cold, so it's not setting super fast. but if it's warmer, you have to really work fast. Now we don't have to worry about moving the model because the upper one is already set. Looks like it's just barely made it. So now we'll just use our fingers to shape the stone. Since my fingers are dry, the stone is kind of sticky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my fingers a little bit. And like as you see it, I'm using my thumb, my index finger in the back, since I can't reach it with my thumb. You can use your regular finger too if you like. You can do the same thing with plaster as well as mounting stone. In fact, plaster might be a little easier for you because it sets a little bit slower. But it's the same idea. You have to wait for it to set up until it's at this stage where you can actually sculpt it. But to clean your fingers, because that's the way to achieve this nice smooth surface. And after this sets up completely, we can use the sandpaper and really smooth it out. This is our finished product. And remember, after this we can use the sandpaper to really smooth it out. And don't forget to clean up the articulator, as everything counts. Presentation is just as important as the work itself.